All right, I say we get started. For those of you joining us, welcome to the Digitas post-game show. We have some interesting content for you today. We're going to share a sneak peek into a quantitative analysis that was developed by some very smart people that work here with me at Digitas. But before we get into it, let's actually meet our starting lineup. I'm Jen Ferrasi, Chief Data Officer here at Digitas, and I have 5 very talented team members with me today who are going to share a little bit about their approach and some early insights that they have developed from it. Before we get into it, I am going to have them introduce themselves and share what their favorite big game spot was.
Great, thank you, Jen. Yeah, so my name is Brad Raymer. I'm in analytics here at Digitas based out of San Francisco. And thinking about my favorite ad from the big game this year, I really enjoyed Popcorners and their Breaking Bad references. I think they recognized that Breaking Bad was a really great trending content recently with a lot of really funny memes. And to me, that was a great example of seizing the opportunity that presented.
Hi, I'm Megan, and my favorite ad was the Hellman's ad. I just think that they did a really good job of utilizing celebrities in a way that was relevant, funny, and memorable.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bridget Brennan. I am on the analytics team based out of Chicago. And my favorite spot was actually the Tubi spot because it was super eye-grabbing, attention-grabbing, and I did end up being the person who was blamed for sitting on the remote. So it got my attention.
Hi, I'm Erin Walsh. I'm also an analyst based out of Chicago, and my favorite ad was the Dexcom ad. Not only because I'm a huge Nick Jonas fan, but also I found that it was really the first time I had ever been actually interested in a pharmaceutical type of commercial before.
That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
I'm Meredith Goshal. I also work in analytics out of San Francisco. My favorite ad was the Dunkin' Donuts ad. I thought kind of playing on the funniness of the Ben Affleck memes with Dunkin' Donuts and actually incorporating him into a commercial just felt really funny and original and just really memorable overall.
Yeah, meme-based creatives seem to have a really good year this year.
I love it. So you all developed a quantitative approach to analyzing ad slots that ran during the big game. We're really curious to see what you found, but before we get into that, tell us a little bit more about the methodology you used.
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to that. I think what really sets our approach apart from a lot of the other analyses done for big game ads this year is the way that we incorporate multiple different data sources and blend them together to form our index. So I think we're capable of pulling in, or what we've done is pulled in, things like social mentions and social sentiment from tools like NetBase, search volume. We even include a financial impact aspect into our index. All of these sources flow together that kind of help level the playing field for all the ads that appeared in the big game this year and give us an idea of who scored and who didn't so much.
All right, so the big reveal, we're all on the edge of our seats. Who won?
Right.
So we saw Popcorners really pop off across all of our metrics. And so they far and away exceeded everyone else in the pack. And next up behind them was Tubi, who had an ad that was extremely attention grabbing, and everyone instantly noticed it and was talking about it. So the fact that Popcorners was able to have such a stretch ahead of everybody else is really amazing to see. On the flip side, Bush's did not score as great for us on our metrics. They really honed in on their tried and true, roll that beautiful bean footage ad with the dog that I love, but it just didn't get people talking and it didn't get the buzz going. And we even saw brands like M&M who tried to capitalize on buzz that they already have going, and they just played it a little too safe and it didn't get new buzz going.
Yeah, Making to that point, I think it's really interesting that like, the brands that you just referenced, looking at like Popcorners and Tubi, our top two, those are sort of like the new kids on the block. This is some of their first spots in the Super Bowl. And I think it's really interesting that compared to, the Bush's baked beans and the M&Ms, which are sort of veterans of this, didn't necessarily drive the score that they may have hoped for.
Definitely. I think they were willing to take a few more risks, and that
Yeah.
really ended up paying off for them. Whereas the more veteran brands played it a little bit more safe.
Yeah. Well, I think Tubi in particular is a good example of that, to what you were saying earlier, Bridget, about making sure they had a unique creative idea and not necessarily just playing it safe. I mean, if there's anything that caused controversy, it's the commercial that got everybody yelling at their dad or their brother to get off the remote, but it worked.
It really did such a good job of like disrupting the experience in terms
Yeah.
of like traditional ads, and you're like, oh wait, did I screw something up? How can we really just made it super, super memorable for everyone?
Yeah.
And it was a really strong spot too, because it translated so well into social media. You're seeing on TikTok now, who was the person in your household who sat on the TV, or like I, of course, was the one who got blamed. So again, just a really great execution and really interesting spot.
Yeah. That's going to be really fascinating to see how that continues to resonate over time.
I love that. Along those lines, can you talk a little bit about some of the insights and trends that you're seeing from your analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. We looked at a bunch of different trends and themes in the data, from everything from things pretty straightforward like industry verticals, creative type and feel. Even looked at whether or not it helped to have puppies in the spot, which, unfortunately, it didn't really net out, but would have been a fun thing to talk about, right? But one of the first key things that jumped out to us and was really interesting and notable is this idea of a new versus a veteran brand. And really all we mean by that is whether or not a brand has had a spot in the big game historically, which is kind of interesting, and kind of leads into a very natural hypothesis, right? Like veteran brands should really be scoring higher than brands who haven't had a spot in the big game before, right? They have years of experience and learnings to lean on from past years, where newcomers can obviously take a look at what they've seen in the past, but they kind of just have to make it up as they go and hope it lands. So interestingly enough, the data told us the exact opposite, which was interesting. Newcomers really hit it out of the park. You can see in this chart to the left here. Newcomers both average significantly higher than veteran brands, and those top two performers that we mentioned were new to the big game spots. And really at the end of the day, there are two main takeaways that come out of these results, right? So one is that new to the big game spots had more room to grow, and the big game is the time to do that. This year, there were actually over 113 million viewers that tuned in, which is up year over year too, which is great. And those viewers are known to actively choose and buy into watching the commercials and spots. So it's just a really unique opportunity, and our top scorers took advantage of this opportunity, led with strong creative storytelling, and grabbed people's attention in a new way, which was great. On the flip side, though, the veteran brands, we all know, are like a to be expected in the big game commercial worlds. Every year you're ready for and expecting a Bush's Beans commercial or an M&Ms and Pepsi, those types of brands. What our index really proves and is really interesting is that those brands can't just rely on familiarity, past success, even celebrities and star power, things like that. They have to continue to innovate if they want to see results and keep up with these newcomers. So really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point about veteran brands. We've seen an ad for Budweiser almost every year, not only in just the big game, but also in NFL, sports games in general. So I think it's really important, especially if they are going to continue running with Super Bowl spots, they have to do something different, because they admittedly do have a little bit of a taller order in order for them to really see growth based on this spot, which, kind of based on this index, we didn't see as much, whereas the newcomers really did take more of those risks like we talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. Meredith, just to echo that, and like this idea of doing something different and tying back to what you mentioned earlier, Bridget, about this being a unique opportunity. Like, I think the Super Bowl in itself as a tentpole moment is a unique moment, right? Like, few other times will advertisers have access to a really big qualified audience where they're actually seeking to watch 100% of your ad with full attention. And then you add on the fact that this year we saw, I think it was Publicis' report that demonstrated that there were lifts in viewership for the Super Bowl across all generations, which is fascinating. So it's almost like the brands that did really well this year had a lot to win, and it seems like a miss from those sort of veteran brands that they kind of didn't seize the opportunity, maybe because they were just too comfortable.
Yeah, in general, Super Bowl viewership, content mentions, all that good stuff definitely was up for this year, which was interesting. Looking at like mentions on social listening and all that good stuff, seems like there was a lot more buzz this year. So again, just kind of a taller order and a unique opportunity.
That's interesting too, Meredith, because I don't know that people were necessarily expecting these sorts of lifts in viewership trends year over year as well.
Yeah, in general, there's just been such a decline in terms of linear TV, like viewership in those big tentpole moments like the Oscars and the Grammys and things, but it seems like the Super Bowl is very much largely unaffected. But that also means that you know, you only have one opportunity to make that big mark, whereas you used to be able to kind of spread it out.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
One of the other
Great.
trends that we saw, Jen, was looking at celebrities. It really was a huge year for celebrities. Over half the Super Bowls featured some kind of superstar, and not only were they, you know, lots of celebrities in the ads, they were huge celebrities. So Sylvester Stallone, looking at Elton John, J-Lo, really ran the gamut. However, when we actually looked at the index, we actually saw that ads that did not feature a celebrity performed better, which was really interesting. Kind of looking at the creative, we kind of parsed out that some of the ads with celebrities relied a little bit too much on the celebrity and kind of leaned away from the creative storytelling, which did impact that piece. And then also another thing that we really saw was really just a theme of nostalgia.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think just going back to what we were just talking a moment ago, yeah, celebrities versus not, and new versus veteran advertisers, recognizing that new advertisers that leverage celebrities performed better than veteran advertisers that did, I think really gets at what you were just saying, Meredith, which is this idea that maybe veteran brands just tried to rely too much on star power alone to get their message across.
Yeah, and just in general, the whole idea of celebrity is changing. You know, there are so many influencers, and of course they are still huge celebrities, but the poll, you know, maybe they just don't have quite the same weight that they used to.
Yeah.
So again, you know, it's almost kind of going back to the new versus veteran brand. You know, you do kind of have a little bit of a taller order if you have a big celebrity, you know, making sure that you really are leveraging them in the right way and really truly innovating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sorry. I think that Bush is a great example of that. Like slapping a Peyton Manning onto this Bush's Beans commercial is kind of exactly what we're getting at here. You know, you can't just put Peyton Manning and have him serve some beans and think that it's going to take off. You've got to do something that's a little bit different.
Yeah, and on the flip side, if you have a celebrity that really you can tie into the brand and make it come together as one, it makes a lot more sense, and those ones scored a lot better.
Yeah. I mean, look at Popcorners for the example of that, you know?
Yeah, also Doritos did a great job. You know, they, like I mentioned earlier about nostalgia, they did a great job of kind of bridging that gap. They had a younger feature of Jack Harlow, you know, traditionally has a much younger audience, really popular on social media with Gen Z. But then they also did a great job of tying in, you know, older celebrities and more traditional. They had like Missy Elliott and Elton John, and then it all kind of came together in a very funny, humorous way, you know, kind of referencing a triangle, which of course is their one of their points of differentiation in the chip category. And so it just felt really original, really funny. And that was actually one of our top performers as well.
Yeah, I love that bit about Doritos, Meredith, and what you had mentioned about nostalgia, because I think a lot of analysis this year focus on nostalgia because we recognize that it can really drive performance. But I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the younger generations might not vibe or recognize the nostalgic aspects of a creative. So by Doritos sort of appealing to the older generations with that nostalgic piece, and then simultaneously leveraging Jack Harlow to appeal to the younger generations to make sure that all viewers are kind of getting content that resonates with them, I think is a really great example of them not only securing the celebrity, but finishing the storyline. And to your point earlier about like Bush's baked beans, it almost feels like they just grabbed Peyton Manning and then the sort of creative or story ideation ended there. Because the messaging that both they had and the M&Ms, the one that you referenced earlier, I think more often than not just led people to be a bit confused.
Yeah, and with that, I think like great point about the Doritos audience, like you're capturing all types of audiences that are going to be watching the Super Bowl. And at like a hefty $7 million estimated per spot just for securing the spot alone, it really
Mhm.
shows that Doritos took the opportunity to really put through a thoughtful ad. And really, to me, and let me know if you guys agree, I think that the overarching theme here is that you really get out of the big game what you put into it. So it's all about the effort. You know, Doritos is more of a veteran brand. I mean, we've seen them before, but they still took the time to really consider who was going to be watching and try to appeal to everyone.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Aaron. It really does seem like that. You get out of this what you put into it.
So the outstanding question then is it worth it for that hefty price tag? Is investment in the big game worth it for brands and their potential ROI?
Yeah, Jen, I can take that one. We really found that storytelling is king here. The big game really captures such a massive viewership across all demographics, as we were mentioning earlier. And bringing it back to Meredith's point, big budgets and celebrity presence is really not enough to grab the audience's attention. And the brands who understood the assignment recognized their opportunity for long form content and such an engaged group of viewers. I mean, I can think back for myself personally, like I obviously didn't have a team in the Super Bowl this year, so I was most looking forward to the ads. And I think that that's a popular trend that we've seen across the board. Everyone's super excited to see what these big brands come up with. And it's really an even playing field across all brands. And bringing it back to Bridget's point too, previous brand exposure and that veteran brands doesn't necessarily mean that they will get the maximum return on investment. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, at $7 million just to secure your place, that's a big investment. So basically, like the big game itself, there are no guarantees or cheat sheets to really help brands in winning the biggest day in advertising.
But if you were to invest in the ads that we saw, or the companies that had ads on the big game, you would have done better over the weekend than if you just stuck it in the stock market or the S&P 500 in general. So across the board, excellent opportunity.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to bring it all back together, Jen, to your point, like, is the big game worth it to advertisers? I think the answer is yes, it can be. It's a matter of putting into it all of your effort and making sure that you pull together something that is really cohesive, tells a compelling story, and recognizing the unique opportunity that the Super Bowl presents. Because to your point, Aaron, that you mentioned earlier, $7 million is a lot of money to spend for something to not score so well. So finding ways to ensure that your activation in the big game is as successful as possible, I think is going to be key. But then at the same time, advertisers should keep an eye out for ways that they can maximize their investment too with that ad spot. You know, I mean, for example, we take Duncan, we had a great opportunity with Ben Affleck and that sort of celebrity power. Or for example, Uber One with Diddy and Donna and Hadaway. It's like, how can you take that creative and also use it elsewhere and maximize sort of the conversation for your brand around the Super Bowl or around the big game rather. So I think the answer is definitely yes, it can be, but back to what Aaron says, it really truly is dependent on you get out of it what you put into it. And I think what's going to be fascinating is when we've got our even longer form report where we dive even deeper into some of these details.
Yeah, I
Great.
think that's a great point, Brad. And just that keeping in mind that what we've put together here is kind of like a gut reaction, if you will, to what the Super Bowl performance looked like, and taking in a lot of key data points like buzz online and sentiment, stock market prices, things like that. But we have a lot of opportunity to dive into this a little bit deeper, and take a closer look in what those actually netted out into the long term too, which I think is really interesting as well.
Yeah.
So I think we can look forward to having both a short-term report next week and also a longer form one as the year progresses.
Well, and I just think it'll be fascinating to see how these things shift, you know? Does
For
a
sure.
brand that scored really well in some of the immediate things that we're talking about right now see the same sort of growth in the longer term and in terms of more like tangible outcomes? I think that's going to be really fascinating to look at. Or for example, the creatives. Yeah.
Exactly.
Especially for the smaller companies that, you know, were newer to the big game, you know, of course, it is a little bit natural in that they would have a little bit more buzz because they're new, they're fresh on the scene. But, you know, was that investment worth it in the long run? You know, does that actually pay off in, you know, revenue and all that good stuff? I think will also be something that's just really interesting to look at.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, Aaron loved the Dexcom commercial, which did not score great because it doesn't get a lot of buzz because who's really going online tweeting about pharmaceuticals? But in the long term, it might actually pan out that she chose a real winner because on the financial end, it might be more there
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that points to, you know, there's many ways to kind of gauge success, and each brand and each client is also going to have their own entirely unique way of understanding, you know, was my spot in the big game this year successful? And what we're trying to do here is kind of put everybody on that same even playing field, so to speak. And to do that again in that longer form analysis is going to be really interesting. Because I think we'll also have a better idea from those respective brands of how they define success and how that's parallel with our report.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for sharing some initial findings from your analysis with us. We definitely look forward to reading the long form report when it is available late next week. And have a great day. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. We hope you found it insightful and you enjoyed our conversation today.
Yeah. Thank you guys very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.